they laughed. And that was the moment everything finally clicked for me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No one pointed or whispered. There was no sudden confrontation, no sharp exchange of words. It was just laughter. Easy, comfortable laughter, floating under soft string lights in my parents' backyard, while I stood there holding a plastic cup of champagne, smiling along, like I always did, realizing I had just been erased in front of 50 people. My name is Jessica Thompson. I'm 33 years old, and up until that night, I truly believed my family was fine. Not perfect, what family is, but functional enough that I never questioned my place in it. We weren't the type to say I love you at the end of every phone call, but we showed up. Birthdays, holidays, obligatory group photos. That always felt like love to me. Quiet, practical love. My father's retirement party was supposed to be one of those moments that pulled us together. He'd spent 37 years as a mechanical engineer, the kind of man who kept his tools spotless and alphabetized, who fixed things instead of throwing them away. He deserved to be celebrated, and my mother made sure he was. White tents were rented, a caterer was booked, gold balloons spelled out, "Congrats, Dad," in a way that felt more like a wedding than a backyard gathering. Everything was meticulous, polished, and carefully curated, just like our family liked to appear. My older sister Julia handled the decorations and made sure everyone knew it. My brother Mark organized the entertainment, which mostly meant planning his own speech and testing the microphone far too many times. I designed the slideshow. I scanned old photos restored, the faded ones, synced them to Dad's favorite songs, and stayed up late fixing transitions no one would consciously notice. No one asked me to do it. They never had to. I was always the one who filled in the gaps quietly. For most of the night, things went smoothly. People laughed, ate, reminisced. Dad looked genuinely happy, a little overwhelmed even, and seeing that gave me a small sense of pride. Then the speeches started. Mom went first, graceful and composed as always. She thanked everyone for coming, praised Dad's work ethic, and joked about finally getting her handyman back full-time. People laughed. It was warm and appropriate. Then Julia took the microphone. She teared up immediately. Of course she did. Her voice trembled in all the right places as she talked about Dad being her role model and Mom being the heart of the family. She turned toward Mark next, smiling brightly. "And my amazing brother," she said, "who's always stepped up to lead, to make decisions, to protect us. You really are the backbone of this family." The applause came quickly and loudly. I clapped too, waiting honestly, waiting for my name to come next. It didn't. She continued thanking cousins, aunts, even her best friend from high school. I wasn't mentioned once. At first I laughed quietly to myself, assuming it had to be an oversight. Who forgets their own sister in a family speech? But then I noticed Mom nodding proudly, hands clasped, eyes shining. Mark smirked just slightly. That was when the truth settled in my chest, heavy and unmistakable. This wasn't a mistake. This was normal to them. Mark's speech made it worse. He adjusted his tie like he was about to deliver something important and joked about leadership. "Some people are born to lead," he said, grinning. "Others, well, others just follow." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even my father chuckled. I smiled. I clapped. I did exactly what I'd been trained to do my entire life, make myself smaller so no one would feel uncomfortable. After the speeches, I kept busy. I stacked chairs, gathered plates, packed leftovers, helped Julia load decorations into her car. She didn't look at me once. Neither did Mark. When I finally left, Mom kissed my cheek like everything was perfectly normal. That night I went home and sat on my couch, staring at nothing for a long time. It wasn't just the speeches that hurt. It was what they revealed. I wasn't part of their picture. I was background, reliable, quiet, useful, but easily forgotten. The next morning, Julia posted a group photo online with a caption celebrating the real pillars of our family. She tagged Mom, Dad, Julia, and Mark. My name wasn't there. That was when something inside me shifted. Not anger, not rage, just clarity. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to shout or demand recognition. I wanted them to see what they'd done, to understand what it felt like to exist quietly on the edge of your own family for years. So I started thinking, planning, carefully. 4 days later, I opened my laptop, typed a letter, and attached a single file. When I hit send, I didn't expect chaos. I expected a ripple. What I didn't realize was that this quiet decision would fracture everything they thought was unbreakable. But before I explain what I sent them, you need to understand how it got this bad in the first place, because this didn't start at a retirement party. It started years ago, back when I learned what it meant to be the quiet one. Looking back, it's almost embarrassing how clearly the roles were defined from the beginning, even when we were kids. At the time, I didn't see it as favoritism. I thought it was just personality. Julia was loud, expressive, always performing. She told stories at the dinner table like she was already standing on a stage waiting for applause. Mark was confident and decisive, the kind of boy adults like to praise for being a natural leader. And me, I was the easy one, the agreeable one. The child who didn't cause problems, didn't demand attention, didn't need much. That difference earned me a quiet kind of praise. Jessica's so independent. Jessica's so helpful. You never have to worry about Jessica. At the time, those words felt like compliments. It took years for me to understand what they really meant. They meant I didn't require effort. I didn't need to be considered. I would adapt. When something went wrong, I was the one who stepped in without being asked. If Mom forgot to pick something up, I handled it. If Julia stormed out after an argument, I followed her. If Mark needed help with a project money or a last-minute favor, I was expected to say yes. And I did. Not because anyone forced me, but because I believed that was what love looked like. You show up. You support. You don't keep score. There was a Christmas years ago that should have opened my eyes. Julia had gotten into a fight with Mom over her boyfriend not being invited to dinner. She slammed the door, took her car, and disappeared into the snow. Everyone panicked, but no one moved. After an hour, Dad looked at me and said, "Can you go get her?" I didn't hesitate. I drove an hour through icy roads, found her sitting in a parking lot crying and furious, and brought her home. When we walked back in, no one thanked me. Dinner resumed like nothing had happened. That was my role: fix the disruption, then disappear. When Mark crashed his car senior year and didn't want to tell Dad I helped him pay for the repairs, I was working part-time and barely scraping by, but I told myself it was temporary. Family helps family. Later, when Dad praised Mark for being responsible under pressure, I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and said nothing. I told myself recognition wasn't important, being useful was. Over time, usefulness became expectation. Jessica will handle it. Jessica won't complain. Jessica doesn't mind. And the worst part was that I reinforced it. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I taught them exactly how little effort it took to overlook me. I trained them to forget me. By the time we were adults, the pattern was set in stone. Julia was the emotional center. Mark was the decision maker, and I was the background support system. I fixed computers. I babysat. I helped plan events without getting credit. I showed up early and left late. I told myself it didn't hurt, even when it did. So when Dad's retirement party came around, part of me shouldn't have been surprised. I'd been invisible in private for years. Seeing it happen in public just stripped away the illusion I'd been clinging to. Hearing it spoken out loud, laughed at, normalized, did something to me that quiet acceptance never could. It forced me to stop lying to myself. For days after the party, I replayed every moment, every interaction, every memory where I'd told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't. This wasn't sensitivity or insecurity. It was a pattern one I'd helped maintain because I thought love meant endurance. But endurance without acknowledgement isn't love. It's erasure. That realization didn't make me angry right away. It made me observant. I started paying attention to the things I'd always brushed off: the way my contributions were minimized, the way my presence was optional, the way decisions were made without me even when they affected me. And the more I noticed, the clearer it became that this wasn't something that could be fixed with a conversation or a heartfelt plea. I didn't want to confront them yet. I wanted to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. I wanted to see how deep it went, because if I was going to do anything at all, it wasn't going to be emotional or impulsive. It was going to be deliberate. The quiet one had learned how to watch. The days after my father's retirement party felt strangely unreal, like waking up after a bad dream and realizing the feeling hasn't faded. The house wasn't buzzing with excitement anymore, but the humiliation lingered, clinging to everything. My phone lit up constantly with family messages, photos of leftover cake reminders about returning rented chairs, jokes Mark sent to the group chat about leadership and carrying the legacy forward. I replied like I always had. Short, polite responses, a thumbs up here, A quick haha there. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Every laugh from that night replayed in my head. The way Julia's voice skipped right over me. The way Mom nodded like it was all perfectly normal. The way Mark smirked as if he'd scored a point. I told myself to stop overthinking it, but the truth was impossible to ignore once I'd finally seen it. When you've spent years convincing yourself something doesn't hurt, the moment you admit it does is jarring. On the fifth day, I drove over to my parents' house to return a box of tools Dad had lent me months earlier. It should have been a quick visit, 10 minutes at most. Instead, it became the moment I realized just how deeply ingrained my role really was. Mark's car was already in the driveway. He, Julia, and Dad were standing near the garage laughing about something I'd clearly missed. They all went quiet when they saw me pull in, not startled, just paused, like my presence had interrupted a scene that didn't require me. "Hey," I said, lifting the box. "Just bringing these back." "Oh, Jessica." Mom called from the porch, her tone polite but distant. "We didn't think you'd be coming by today." I smiled, setting the box down. I figured I'd get them out of the way. Julia gave me a tight smile. "You didn't have to rush. We could have grabbed them next time." Next time. As if my time didn't matter unless it was convenient. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "You missed it," he said, grinning. "Dad and I are talking about remodeling the garage, turning part of it into a workshop/hangout space." "That sounds nice," I said. "Want help setting it up?" He laughed, not unkindly, but dismissively. "Nah, I've got it covered." Dad cleared his throat. "Your brother's got a good plan. I told him he could use the old tool chest." The tool chest. The one Dad and I had restored together when I was in high school. 2 summers of sanding, polishing, replacing hinges, learning patience side by side. I remembered every dent, every late evening in the garage. I swallowed and nodded. "That's great," I said. "I'm glad it'll get used." Julia chimed in, sensing the shift. "We're thinking of painting a mural on the wall, too. Something like Family First. Mark's girlfriend is designing it." Family first. I smiled like the irony didn't sting. "That fits." I didn't stay long after that. When I got back into my car, I sat there for a moment staring at the house. Through the window, I could see them laughing again, already back to their conversation. I realized something then that I probably should have understood years earlier. Being part of my family didn't mean belonging. It meant being useful. And once your usefulness wasn't needed, you faded into the background. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work, but my attention kept drifting back to the group chat Julia had started for Dad's memory book. She wanted photos, letters, stories from everyone. Out of habit, I contributed. I sent her restored photos of Dad, teaching me how to use tools, one of him holding me in the garage when I was little, and a short piece about what he taught me about patience and craftsmanship. She never replied. 2 days later, she shared a digital preview of the book. Everyone's memories were there, everyone's photos. Mine were missing entirely. When I messaged her privately, she responded hours later. "Oh, sorry, Jessica. Your email must have gone to spam or something. I already printed everything, though. Maybe next time." Next time. Like there would be another chance to celebrate nearly 4 decades of my father's career. By the weekend, the distance became unmistakable. Not cold, just indifferent, like I'd been quietly downgraded from family member to optional guest. Then came Sunday dinner. Mom texted that morning. "Small dinner tonight. Just us and a few close friends. Nothing fancy." I almost declined, but some stubborn part of me still wanted to believe there was something left to salvage. When I walked in, the smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Laughter spilled from the dining room, then faltered when I stepped inside. There were 6 chairs at the table. Only 5 had plates. "Oh, Jessica," Mom said brightly, glancing at the empty spot. "We weren't sure you were coming, so we didn't set another plate. There's some food in the kitchen." I told her it was fine and took a seat anyway. Conversation flowed around me, full of inside jokes and shared memories. One of Dad's old coworkers leaned toward Mark and said, "You must be proud following in your father's footsteps." Mark smiled. Mom beamed. "He really is the responsible one," she said. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but enough to change everything. When I excused myself to the bathroom and stared into the mirror, I didn't see anger staring back at me. I saw clarity. When I returned, no one noticed I'd been gone. That was when I understood words wouldn't fix this. Apologies wouldn't either. If they were ever going to see what they'd done, I'd have to show them. That night, I opened my laptop again. The letter I'd started days earlier sat unfinished on the screen. I closed it and started something new instead, something quieter, something undeniable. I didn't rush what came next. That was the most important part. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was observing, collecting, and letting the full weight of the truth settle before I acted. The letter I'd started days earlier, polite, careful, filled with phrases like "I feel," and "I hope you understand," no longer made sense to me. Words like that only work when people are willing to listen. My family had spent years proving they weren't. So instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and began pulling things together. At first, it was just photos, old ones. Birthday parties where I stood off to the side holding the camera. Family vacations where I appeared once or twice, usually cropped halfway out. Then came emails threads where I'd organized events, handled logistics, fixed problems only for the credit to land elsewhere. Text messages where plans were changed without telling me, then casually justified afterward. Little moments I'd brushed off at the time because they seemed too small to matter. Lined up side by side, they told a very different story. The more I gathered, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't about forgetfulness or bad timing. It was consistency. I had been present, involved, and contributing, but never centered, never acknowledged. I wasn't just overlooked, I was edited out. What surprised me most was how calm I felt while compiling it all. I expected grief, maybe anger, but instead there was a steady, almost clinical focus. It was like I was finally allowed to tell the truth without apologizing for it. Each screenshot, each photo, each email felt like another piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Then I found the email. It was buried deep in an old forwarded chain, something I'd been copied on months ago without noticing. The subject line read, "About Jessica." That alone made my stomach tighten. I opened it slowly, already sensing that whatever I was about to read would change something permanently. It was from Julia, addressed to Mom and Mark. "I know Jessica means well," she'd written, "but honestly, I think keeping her at a bit of a distance is better for everyone. She's sensitive and it complicates things. We need peace, not drama. Let's keep events simple." Mom had replied beneath it. "Agreed. You know how she is. Best to keep things light." Mark's response was just 2 words. "Less hassle." I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. What I felt was something colder and far more final than shock. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a decision they had made together, quietly, deliberately, and they had never intended for me to know. That was the moment I stopped wondering if I was being unfair. I added the email to the folder. When everything was finally assembled, I looked through it once, twice, then a third time. There was nothing exaggerated, no commentary that could be dismissed as emotional, just facts, dates, patterns. At the very end, I added a single sentence on a blank page. "I don't want anything from you. I just want you to see me." Then I opened my email. I addressed it to the family group chat. The letter itself was brief, calm, almost formal. I thanked them for the party, for the years of support they believed they'd given me. I told them I'd learned a lot recently about my place in the family, and that clarity mattered to me. I attached the file titled "It Perspective" and read everything one last time. When I hit send, I didn't feel relieved. I felt resolved. Within 10 minutes, the read receipts started appearing. Julia, read, Mark, read, Mom, read, Dad, read, and then nothing. No questions, no outrage, no denials, just silence. At first, I told myself they needed time. After an hour, I told myself they were processing. By the end of the day, I understood what the silence really was. It wasn't confusion. It was avoidance. The same strategy they'd always used when something didn't fit their version of the family. 2 days later, my phone still hadn't buzzed. And somehow that silence hurt less than the laughter at the party. Because at least now I knew the truth. The silence didn't break the way I expected it to. There were no angry phone calls, no defensive messages, no attempts to explain or soften what they'd read. For 2 full days, my phone stayed eerily quiet. I kept it nearby, at first checking it more often than I'd like to admit, watching the screen light up with notifications that had nothing to do with my family. By the 3rd day, I stopped checking. By the 5th, I understood that this was their answer. The attachment I'd sent wasn't cruel. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't accuse or insult. It simply showed the truth, laid out clearly and calmly, without emotion for them to dismiss. And apparently, even that was too much. The following weekend, I drove to my parents' house, not because I wanted confrontation, but because I needed closure. I didn't call ahead. I didn't announce myself. I just showed up hoping naively that maybe seeing me in person would force a real conversation. Dad didn't answer the door. It was Mom who stepped outside, closing it gently behind her, like she didn't want the house to hear what she was about to say. "Jessica," she began, arms crossed, voice tight but controlled. "Maybe it's best if you take some space for a while." I blinked. Space. She sighed, already tired of the conversation. "Everyone's upset. You made things uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," I repeated slowly. "By telling the truth." Her expression hardened. "You made your sister cry." That sentence landed like a weight in my chest, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. Julia's feelings had always mattered more than mine. "I didn't make her cry," I said carefully. "I showed her what she helped do." Mom shook her head. "She's always tried to include you. You just don't appreciate what people do for you. Sometimes you expect too much." I stared at her, the words echoing. Expect too much. You mean expecting to be acknowledged, to be treated like part of the family? "Don't twist my words," she snapped. Then softer, dismissive. "You could have handled this privately." "I did," I said, "for years." She didn't respond to that. She just sighed again, the same sigh she'd used my whole life when a conversation became inconvenient. Finally, she said, "It would be better if you didn't come around for a bit. Let everyone cool off." So I left. That was the last time I saw my family in person for more than 6 months. The first few weeks after that were brutal in a way I wasn't prepared for. I'd been ignored before, but never this completely. No birthday call, no check-ins, no random messages from Dad asking me to fix his computer or help with something around the house. Even the family group chat went silent, like it had been erased along with me. For a while, I started to wonder if they were right, if maybe I really was too sensitive, too quiet, too easy to overlook. Guilt crept in at odd moments, whispering that I should have just let it go like I always did, that I should have stayed silent for the sake of peace. But guilt leaves behind a strange kind of emptiness. And if you sit with that emptiness long enough, it starts to change shape. The quiet in my apartment felt heavy at first. No background noise from group chats, no constant low-level anxiety about missing an obligation. But slowly the silence began to feel clean. I could spend my evenings how I wanted. I could rest without feeling lazy. I could exist without auditioning for approval. I started taking long walks after work just to clear my head. I fixed small things around my apartment, not because anyone needed me to, but because I enjoyed it. I built a shelf I didn't need, refinished an old chair I found on the curb. Working with my hands had always calmed me, but this time it felt different. It wasn't about being useful, it was about being present. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to consider. I was good at what I did. Not just competent, but skilled. I'd spent years solving problems for my family without recognizing that those abilities were valuable beyond them. Once I stopped giving them away for free, I started to see their worth. I began taking small freelance jobs, repairs for neighbors, custom pieces for friends of friends. I didn't charge much at first, but people noticed the quality. They thanked me. They recommended me. They told me I had a gift. Helping people no longer felt like obligation. It felt like choice. By the end of 3 months, what started as a distraction had become something real. I gave it a name, Second Frame, partly because of the craftsmanship, partly because it felt like I was finally building a second life, one that fit me instead of shrinking me. I still felt the loss, especially on quiet Sundays and holidays, but it didn't own me anymore. I was learning how to live without waiting for my family to decide whether I mattered. And that changed everything. The strangest part about being cut off wasn't the anger or even the loneliness. It was how quickly my life began to fill itself back in once I stopped waiting for my family to occupy so much space in it. The quiet that had felt unbearable at first slowly became something I protected. My days developed a rhythm that belonged to me alone, shaped by work, small projects, and the steady satisfaction of finishing something with my own hands. Second Frame started as a side hustle I barely talked about. A neighbor asked me to fix a cabinet. A friend of a friend wanted a custom desk. I worked late into the evenings not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the problem solving, the patience it required, the way raw materials slowly turned into something solid and useful. For the first time, the work I did wasn't invisible. People noticed. They thanked me. They paid me fairly. And more importantly, they respected my time. One afternoon, a client asked if I could design something unique for her home office. I spent a week sketching ideas, measuring angles, experimenting with finishes. When I delivered it, she stood there staring at it for a long moment before saying, "I didn't even know how to explain what I wanted until I saw this." She posted about it online, tagging my small business page that I'd created almost as an afterthought. Within days, I had several new inquiries. Within weeks, I was booked out. By the end of the third month, I had to admit what I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just a distraction anymore, it was a career. As my work picked up, something else changed too. The way I saw myself shifted. I wasn't the quiet helper waiting to be noticed. I was someone building something tangible, something people valued. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped saying yes out of guilt. That was around the time my father finally reached out. The message was short and awkward. "Hope you're doing okay. Your mom's still upset. Julia is pregnant." I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed congratulations and deleted it. Typed, "Tell her I said congrats," and deleted that too. The truth was, nothing about that message felt like an invitation. It felt like information carefully delivered without accountability. So I didn't respond. I poured myself into work instead. Long nights sanding wood until my hands ached. Early mornings sketching designs over coffee. There was something therapeutic about the process, about shaping something broken into something new. The more I built, the lighter I felt. A few months later, I was invited to showcase my work at a local crafts fair. I almost declined, convinced no one would care, but I went anyway. To my surprise, people stopped. They asked questions. They lingered. A local blogger featured my booth and wrote, "There's a quiet strength in Jessica Thompson's work. You can feel the patience in every piece." That phrase stuck with me. Quiet strength. For most of my life, quiet had been treated like a flaw. Now it was being recognized as skill. Not long after that, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I nearly let it go to voicemail. When I answered, I recognized Julia's voice immediately. "Hey, Jessica, it's me." She sounded nervous, unsure. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry." I didn't speak. She kept going, her words tumbling over each other. She told me she'd reread the attachment, that it had stayed with her, that holding her newborn daughter had forced her to think about what it meant to truly see someone. "I don't ever want her to feel invisible," she said quietly, "and I realize now that's exactly how we made you feel." Something in my chest tightened. I didn't forgive her. Not fully, but I listened. When she finished, I thanked her for saying it. That was all. After the call, I realized something important. I didn't need reconciliation to move forward. I'd already done that on my own. Any relationship with my family would have to meet me where I was now, not where they'd left me. A few weeks later, one of my designs was featured in a regional magazine. Then, a larger publication reached out for an interview. My story was framed as resilience, as quiet reinvention. I didn't send the articles to my family, but I knew they'd see them eventually. And when they did, I wanted them to see the truth clearly. I wasn't gone. I had simply outgrown the version of me they'd been comfortable ignoring. I was in the middle of sanding down a tabletop when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. I'd learned not to interrupt my focus for notifications that usually led nowhere, but something about the timing made me glance at the screen. The message was from Mark. We hadn't spoken in months. "We need to talk, it's urgent." I stared at the words longer than I should have. Urgent had always been Mark's favorite word when he needed something money helped cover silence. For years, that word had pulled me back into the same cycle without question. This time, it didn't have the same power. Still, the tone felt different. There was no joke attached, and no follow-up message trying to control the conversation. Just that single sentence sitting there uncomfortably. I didn't respond right away. I finished sanding the table, wiped my hands, and let myself think. Eventually, curiosity outweighed hesitation. I typed back, "What's going on?" His reply came almost immediately. "Can we meet just you and me? Please." The please caught my attention. Mark never said please. That alone was enough to make me agree. We chose a small cafe on the edge of town, neutral ground. Somewhere public, but quiet enough to talk without an audience. It was raining when I arrived, a steady drizzle that blurred the windows and softened the world outside. I got there early and took a corner booth, more out of habit than caution. When Mark walked in, I barely recognized him at first. His confidence, the easy swagger he'd carried his entire life, was gone. He looked tired, older, uncertain. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hey." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that used to make me uncomfortable. This time I let it sit. Finally, he spoke. It's about Dad. My stomach tightened. What about him? He's not doing great, Mark said. Dizzy spells, chest pain. The doctor says stress, but I don't know. Ever since everything blew up, he hasn't been the same. I didn't rush to comfort him. I'd learned better than that. Mark rubbed his hands together, staring at the table. I think your email, the attachment, it hit him harder than we expected. Mom barely talks about it. Julia avoids it, and Dad, he's just quiet, all the time. There it was, the unspoken truth. Exposure had consequences, and now they were feeling them. Mark Wynne said calmly, I didn't cause that. I just stopped pretending. He nodded slowly. I know. I didn't see it before, but I do now. He hesitated, then added, Mom's planning a small dinner for Dad. Official retirement thing. She's not inviting you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. And you think I should just show up anyway? When you say it like that, it sounds terrible, he admitted. But hear me out. This isn't about fixing the past. It's about showing them who you are now, not the version they dismissed. I studied him carefully. Why now? He didn't answer immediately. Because I think Dad regrets it, he said finally. He looks at your old projects sometimes, like he's trying to understand where he went wrong. But pride's a hell of a thing. That word sat between us. Pride, fear, regret, all the things they'd hidden behind for years. I didn't agree to anything that day. I told Mark I'd think about it. When I left the cafe, the rain had slowed to a mist. The idea of walking back into that house still made my chest tighten, but something else had started to form beneath the fear. Resolve. If I was ever going to step back into their world, I wouldn't do it quietly. I wouldn't do it as the forgotten daughter, the background support. I'd do it as the woman who had built something undeniable. That night, I reached out to Clara Reynolds, a journalist who had interviewed me months earlier. She'd told me to call if I ever did something public. I told her I was planning a showcase, not just an exhibit of my work, but a statement. Within weeks, things moved quickly. I rented a small warehouse downtown, dusty floors, high ceilings, exposed beams. Perfect. I poured myself into it, designing the space with the same care I gave my furniture. I invited other local artists to join, turning it into a collaborative event rather than a solo display. It felt right, honest. When the press release went out, I didn't send it to my family. I didn't need to. Clara made sure it reached them anyway. Julia texted first. I just saw the article. Jessica, this is incredible. Mom forwarded it to the family group chat. Everyone's talking about this. I didn't respond immediately. 2 days passed before I sent a single message. You're all welcome to come. Friday at 6. No explanations, no expectations. Late Wednesday night, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Dad. Proud of you, sweetheart. We'll be there. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The stage was already set. The night of the showcase arrived faster than I expected. By the time the doors opened, the warehouse no longer looked like the dusty shell I'd first walked into weeks earlier. Warm lights hung from the exposed beams, illuminating rows of carefully arranged pieces. Tables, shelves, chairs, and custom builds stood on clean concrete floors, each one finished with the kind of attention I used to give away without thought. Music played softly in the background, just enough to fill the space without distracting from it. People filtered in steadily, neighbors, clients, artists, journalists, friends of friends. They stopped, lingered, asked questions. I moved through the room, calmly answering, explaining, listening. For once, I wasn't hovering on the edges of something. I was at the center of it, grounded and steady. Then I saw them. My parents, Julia and Mark, stood near the back of the space, clustered together, as if they were unsure where to go. Dad's hand rested on the familiar tool chest I'd restored years earlier, now positioned prominently beneath a spotlight. I'd engraved a single word into the wood legacy. His fingers traced the letters slowly, and I watched his face shift as recognition settled in. Julia stood stiffly beside him, pale, her hands clasped together. Mark's usual confidence was nowhere to be found. Even Mom looked unsettled, her composure cracked, in a way I'd never seen before. I didn't rush toward them. I let them stand there and take it in. For years, they'd controlled when and how I appeared in their lives. Tonight, they didn't get that choice. When it was time, I stepped onto the small platform at the center of the room and tapped the microphone. Conversations quieted. Faces turned toward me, curious and expectant. I took a breath, not to steady nerves, but to ground myself. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice calm and even. This space represents more than furniture or design. Every piece here carries years of learning, patience, and persistence. Some of the most important lessons I learned didn't come from mentors or textbooks. They came from being underestimated, overlooked, and expected to stay quiet. A subtle shift rippled through the room. I could feel my family's attention sharpen. For a long time, I continued. I believed staying in the background was just who I was. That being useful without being seen was enough. Eventually, I realized something had to change, not because I wanted recognition, but because invisibility has a cost. I clicked the remote in my hand. The wall behind me lit up. Images appeared one by one, old family photos, emails, screenshots, each one dated, each one quietly annotated. Moments where I'd contributed, organized, repaired, supported without acknowledgement. The audience murmured softly as the pattern became impossible to ignore. This, I said, gesturing to the screen, is what being invisible looks like. I clicked again. New images appeared. My workshop, my hands shaping wood sketches spread across tables, finished pieces being delivered. Photos of me working late, teaching others, collaborating with artists. And this, I continued, is what happens when someone decides not to disappear anymore. The room was silent now. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was doing the work for me. I glanced toward my family. Dad's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the screen. Julia's expression had crumpled tears pooling, but unshed. Mark stared at the floor, his hands clenched. Mom's face was pale, her lips pressed together as if holding back words she could no longer justify. I'm not here to accuse anyone, I said quietly. I'm here to be honest. This work exists because I stopped asking for permission to matter. The final slide appeared. This is the life I built when I stopped waiting to be seen. I stepped away from the microphone. The room exhaled slowly, then filled with applause. Not the polite kind, the real kind. People approached me with congratulations, questions, invitations. The night flowed forward warm and alive. My family stayed where they were watching. For the first time, they couldn't look away and they couldn't rewrite the story. The days after the showcase passed in a quiet blur. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, no long emotional conversations that suddenly fixed everything. Instead, what followed was subtler and far more permanent. The kind of shift you don't notice all at once, but feel in the way people start choosing their words more carefully, in the way old habits no longer work. My family didn't call the next day. They didn't text apologies or demand explanations. They didn't need to. What they'd seen couldn't be unseen. For the first time in our shared history, there was no way to dismiss my presence or minimize my contributions. I had made myself visible without asking for permission, and that alone changed the dynamic. A week later, Julia reached out first. Her message wasn't dramatic, it was simple. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I'd like to understand your work more if you're open to that. There was no defensiveness in it, no attempt to reframe the past, just a quiet acknowledgement. I agreed to meet her for coffee, not because I owed her anything, but because I wanted to see who she was when she wasn't performing for an audience. Mark followed not long after. He stopped making jokes about leadership and started asking questions instead. Not advice disguised as control, but genuine curiosity. It was uncomfortable at first, watching him learn how to interact with me without assuming I'd fill the gaps automatically. But that discomfort was necessary. Growth usually is. Mom and Dad came by the studio one afternoon without calling ahead. They didn't bring speeches or explanations. They walked slowly through the space, touching the surfaces, studying the details. Dad stood by the tool chest for a long time, his hand resting over the engraved word. I should have noticed, he said quietly. That was all. No excuses, no justifications. And somehow that mattered more than a dozen apologies ever could have. I didn't rush reconciliation. I didn't slide back into my old role to make things easier. I set boundaries. I left early when I wanted to. I said no when something didn't feel right. And to my surprise, they adjusted. Not perfectly, not overnight, but enough to show that the truth had finally landed. What surprised me most wasn't their change, though. It was mine. I no longer measured my worth by their recognition. I didn't feel the familiar anxiety before family gatherings, wondering how much of myself I'd have to shrink. I showed up as I was fully without apology, and if that made things awkward sometimes, so be it. Comfort built on erasure was no longer an option. My work continued to grow. New commissions came in, collaborations formed. My name started appearing in places I'd never imagined it would. But the success wasn't the victory I'd been chasing. It was simply evidence of something I'd already learned. The real victory was quieter. It was the moment I realized I could walk away at any time and still be whole, that I didn't need revenge or validation or even understanding. I needed honesty, with myself first and with others second. Standing alone in the studio one evening, after the last client had left and the lights were dimmed, I ran my hand along the edge of the tool chest. The word legacy caught the light steady and solid. I smiled, not with pride or bitterness, but with peace. I hadn't taken anything from my family. I had given myself back.